thank you. I'm glad everybody's here. This is exciting. I think we're going to cover a lot of stuff that's going to be helpful to all of you. I hope that that's the case. I hope that I'm not talking over your heads or under your heads or whatever, right at your heads. Right now I'm over your heads. Welcome. Uh-oh, our projector is askew. Thank you. There we go. So welcome to the Creating Attention Getting Business Videos workshop. If you were here for the Growing Attractive Plants boot camp, you're in the wrong place. So let me give you a sneak peek of what's to come. Of course, I'm going to also try to cover those questions that you all have brought up. Some of them are already here. So in our first section, our first action-packed section, oh, thank you. I'm going to cover shooting. And I'm using that in the broad sense. So shooting, just the whole kind of capturing your video and your audio, because audio is a very important part. So we're going to talk about just some of the fundamentals of how a camera works. Unless everybody is super comfortable with that, it's just good to have an understanding of the basic, what goes on in a camera, some of the terminology and so forth. That if you understand that well, then a lot of other stuff kind of falls into place. When you're thinking through things, it really helps that out. Second, how to create depth in video, since we're working on a flat screen. And then third, how to record good audio, because audio is 2/3 video. No, wait. Video is 2/3 audio. I said that backwards. All right, our second section is going to be on storytelling. And so that's going to be some of the writing aspect and just sort of what to think about when you're writing and you want to create attention-getting videos and so forth. And then also editing techniques, because editing really is storytelling. Editing is taking all those pieces and actually then crafting a story out of it. And then I'm going to get into maybe some advanced techniques, some things that really will give your videos some extra punch. And then our third section is going to be about gearing up to shoot some video. And so some of the things that you can use, different ways to support your camera to get different types of shots. I'm going to cover some things that are pretty inexpensive. I think everything that I have in my first list is under $50, under $40 actually, I think. That it can give you just kind of a little extra boost, a little extra polish for your videos, even if you're just shooting with an iPhone. And then I'll talk about just some of what you would gain if you were to step up to a little higher level. And then I brought some stuff with me, and so we can do some hands-on if you want. Get out your phones or whatever. We can get out my camera and try out a lot of different stuff here that we've talked about. How does that sound? All right, good. Let me write down the questions that we had. Okay, so we had lighting, specifically with available light. And then let's see, storytelling kind of, I mean, that's just, yeah.
How do you turn
jazz up. There we go. Jazz up the boring. Okay, and then, oh yes, sharing video. Sort of tips for getting it online and stuff like that. What affects those things? Okay.
What makes a video viral?
Oh yes, yeah, what makes a video viral? The short answer to that is if I knew, I would have a lot of viral videos. Yeah.
We did have to post an article on the Impact Lab on somebody who's actually kind of thought through that, and they have listed the characteristics of a viral video, but there's still lots of elements of magic in the middle of it also.
I'd love to talk about that in the second section, the storytelling section, because I think that fits in well there. I'd like to get your input from that article. I'm by no means an expert. I have my own theories based on what I've observed.
As soon as you find a cookie cutter approach for what is viral, it no longer is viral.
Yeah. Okay, so, all right. On to section 1, shooting. So you can look and sound like a pro, like this guy, except probably more recent and modern than this guy. So, all right. I'm going to start off each section with a little pop quiz here. This is my don't do it. I'm going to show you a video, and we'll see if you can tell me what I don't want you to do here. All right? I know Anita knows. So, what did I do in this video that I don't want you to do?
Besides the fact that there was no sound.
Well, there is no sound, that's true, but that's not what I meant.
Vertical.
It's vertical, yep. Yep, so, yeah. Which way is your TV oriented? Your TV goes this way, just like that screen right up there. And so video basically should always be shot that way, unless you're shooting for those cool vertical TVs they have like in the malls, you know? Then I guess you get to shoot vertically. But yeah, it's hard to remember sometimes, especially when you're using a phone, because of course the normal way to hold a phone is vertically. And if you're shooting something like this, where you have tall people and this tall piece of furniture here, you go, oh, I'm gonna do it this way. But then you get it on a screen like this and you go, wait a minute. Yep, exactly. Yeah, with the camera, with the still camera, that's exactly the right thing to do, but not with video, unless you want people to turn their TVs on their side every time they watch your video.
So I hit Tim up with that one. I shot every video, like 3 or 4 videos that way, because it was a juggler on a unicycle. It never occurred to me to do it sideways.
So that's lesson 1. That's if you're ever if you're ever at an event and you see me there going, it's because I'm surrounded by people shooting video vertically. And
But if you're only going to watch it on your phone.
Yeah, if you're only going to watch it on your phone, that's fine, you know. So yep. I actually want to come up with a good use for vertical video somewhere. I think, you know. It could be an art form. Anyway, okay. So vertical video, that's our first pop quiz here. Oop, is it going to advance for me? There it goes. All right. Okay, so camera fundamentals. So that's the first fundamental of the camera. For video, it goes in landscape mode. All right. Okay. So, in order for a camera to work, we need something that reacts to light. So in the olden days, that was film. And these days, now we have sensors, of course, in our phones and video cameras and all that sort of thing. So we've got a plane over here that reacts to light, and it picks up all this light coming in. But that's not enough. What if we just have that? What happens? Yeah, we've got to go through something, because we get light coming from all over the place here. And so it's like, you know, this spot has light coming from everywhere. And so it's just a big blurry mess. And, you know, same with all the other spots on there. So what do? We have to force all the light to like go through a single spot. We want the light beams to cross so that we get an image. So we create an aperture. This is, did anybody ever make a pinhole camera back in school or anything like that? Yeah, those were lots of fun. I liked those. So yeah, you take a box and you put a pinhole in it, and then if you have a screen or something like that, or you can actually use photographic paper or something, and you can get an image on that. In fact, I believe the ancient Greeks did this. They had dark rooms with a small hole in the side, and then they would do like a play that they would act outside, and then you'd see it on a screen inside there. It's pretty clever, actually. Upside down, but pretty clever. So we have a small hole here, and then all our light comes through, and now we only have light, say, on this spot, only light from that hitting it, and this spot, only light from that, and so on. So instead of a big mishmash and a big blurry mess, we actually get an image here. But there's kind of a problem, because there's all sorts of light coming off this one spot here, but only this one single solitary ray hits our sensor or our film there, and so we actually get a pretty dark image. All these other light rays that we have out here just get blocked. Now, we kind of want that because this would hit here and this would hit here and mess up our image, but we have a really dim image. And so what could we do? Well, we could widen our aperture, but now we're back to the same problem we had to begin with, where everything hits all over and we're blurry. So, like you said, Daryl, we put a lens in there to gather the light. And so now we've gathered this light and we've taken all these rays coming from this one spot, going out in all these different directions, and we've focused them back on this one spot. Now, a lens has a certain focal length. A lens works at a certain distance. And so things this far away get focused here. But if it's farther away or closer, they actually don't get focused. They kind of end up as sort of a circle there. You know, really they're getting focused here or here instead of right here where our sensor is. So a camera is actually sort of a combination of a lens and a pinhole. You know, we've got this aperture, which is the pinhole aspect of it, and then we've got a lens, which is the focusing aspect of it. And so the things that are at just the right distance, depending on how our lens is focused, end up in focus there. The things that are not at that right distance, it's kind of acting more like a pinhole camera, and so depending on the size of that pinhole, it gets blurry. And then, of course, if we just had our sensor open all the time here, then we also would get a big blurry mess because people are walking by or we're moving the camera around or whatever. And so we have to only allow the light to hit for a brief moment in time. And so we've got a shutter that opens and closes in there. Of course, in most cameras these days, it's an electronic shutter. They turn the sensor on and off rapidly. So we get a brief moment in time. So we get a snapshot instead of a big blurry mess because people are moving. And of course, we do a whole bunch of those in a row to get motion. Basically a whole bunch of still images, like the flipbook or whatever. Does anybody know how many of those per second there are normally in video?
24 or 30, depending.
Yeah, it depends, right, yeah, yeah. So movie film traditionally is 24. Video cameras vary somewhat. 30 is pretty common. 60 is fairly common. A lot of times the 60 frames per second is a thing they call interlaced. Yeah, exactly, where you're not getting the whole image, you get like every other line in terms of the pixels there, and then in the next 60th of a second, it goes back and does the ones that it skipped. Now, we're kind of used to movie film. Over 100 years of movies, we've been trained to think that's what professional looks like. And that's 24 frames a second, and so we're sort of used to that. So, your first tip for making something look a little bit more professional is to get as close as you can to 24 frames a second. Now, with say an iPhone or something like that, you don't have control over that. Fortunately, the iPhone usually shoots at either 30 frames a second or 24 frames a second. I don't know of any apps that give you direct control over that. Somebody who has an Android phone here? You do? Have you used any apps? Okay, all right, okay.
I'm not using it to shoot my video.
Okay.
Small.
Oh, great. Okay, all right, all right. So, yeah, so a lot of times on those, you actually do have control over that. Now, if you can't get 24 frames a second, 30 is pretty close. That 60, whether it's interlaced or progressive, meaning it does the entire thing top to bottom, that's going to have a really video look to it. It's not going to look like that sort of Hollywood film look. And so if you can get 30 progressive, there's a P after it usually, 30p or 24p, that's going to have more of a professional look to it usually. But some things are going, like you mentioned, 4K and so forth. Some things, some people are actually trying to push towards higher frame rates. because it's sort of more lifelike. But we've been trained to...
Camera's panning fast.
Yep, yep, exactly. We've been trained to think that that's not professional, though. So we'll see. Maybe that'll change in the future. You ever see those TVs, like in the store? They'll have the demos. You maybe have them yourself that do the frame interpolation. They'll tell you, oh, this TV takes your movie and it interpolates it to 120 frames per second or 240 frames per second or something like that. Whenever I see those, it bugs me because it doesn't look like a movie anymore. It looks really video-y. But anyway, that's... All right, so all of this is about light coming in. So the light is what gives us the image. But of course, we want to be able to control how much light is coming in. And so with all of those things we just listed, we can control the light that's coming in. What ways can you think of controlling the light? Anybody know? Time. Yeah, the amount of time that the light is hitting the sensor.
Brightness of the light?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how bright the light is. Mm-hmm. Yep.
How diffused it is.
Okay, yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Position of it, if you're using...
Yeah, I suppose, like if it's directly sort of, yeah, yep. Sorry? Yeah, the aperture. Yep.
Well, the most important thing is the direction it's coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the camera itself, there are a few things that we can control. We can boost the signal from the sensor. Or in the film days, you remember the different speeds of film that you get? You get 100 ISO film or 200 or 400 ISO film. That's how sensitive it is to light. Sensors don't really change their sensitivity. You're just boosting the signal. They call that gain or ISO. Gain is kind of an audio term, but the signal is gaining in strength, I guess. That's why they call it gain.
Something in the camera you can set.
Yeah, most, yep. If you're shooting in an automatic mode, most cameras will do that for you. So does anybody know the drawback of changing the gain or the ISO on your camera? Or what it affects, maybe? It's not necessarily...
Your gamma ratio shrinks.
Yeah, you get, less, are you talking about dynamic range? So the dynamic range is the difference between the brightest thing that you can capture and the darkest thing that you can capture. At the low end of your camera's sensitivity, like if you're not boosting it by a lot, you actually have a lot in the shadows that it can see. Sort of a lot of extra latitude, they call it, a lot of extra dynamic range in the shadows that you can see, but not a lot in the highlights. So your highlights are going to blow out very quickly. The more you boost that sensitivity, you're taking the darker stuff and you're sort of brightening it up to medium gray. And so that means you actually took a lot above that and squished it down, which means now your highlights have a lot of extra room. They're not going to blow out as quickly. But your shadows now, you're boosting those up. And so you're dredging stuff up out of the really dark stuff. And so when you do that, you get, it affects your colors and your tones. A lot of times what you see is grain or noise. Actually, I have an example here. You may have seen video kind of like this. So this was shot just with firelight here. And so I don't know if we can actually tell on the screen, but you can see that there's hardly any color to it. All you can see is the red, because in that low light the sensor can't really determine different colors very well. And I don't know that we could tell on this screen here, but it was actually also really speckly. There was a lot of what they call noise or grain in the video there. It just some cameras now are doing a better job of making that kind of look pleasing. It sort of looks organic like film does. Usually though it looks sort of nasty and digital and artificial. So it's usually something you want to try to avoid. All right, so another way that we can control exposure is, like you mentioned, Greg, changing the size of the aperture. So if we change the size of that opening into the camera, then we're letting more or less light in. So, like we said before though, when you open that more, now you're relying more on the lens. You have less of a pinhole camera, and so less is in focus. Of course, the lens is putting the stuff in focus that you're actually focused on, but because your aperture is open real wide, then the stuff that you're not focused on goes out of focus. And so the wider you open that, the shallower your focus becomes. They call that your depth of field, how much is in focus. So if I'm focused here, let's see, on Anita, and I have a very wide depth of field that is I would get that by a small or large aperture. Small aperture, exactly, because it's closer to a pinhole camera. Then I have, maybe everything here from my computer all the way up to Daryl is in focus. If, however, I open the aperture up, then I reduce what's in focus. And so I would have maybe just from the projector to the, I don't know, your recorder over there, Daryl, in focus or something like that. Do you know what the measurements are? You mentioned f-stop. Yeah, those numbers are called f-stop numbers. Does a larger number mean a smaller aperture or a larger aperture?
Smaller.
Smaller aperture, exactly. It's kind of backwards. As the numbers go up, smaller opening, which means greater depth of field, more is in focus. The reason that it works that way, actually I have an example here for you. So this, I didn't put the, okay. That one is f5.6 and this one is f32, I believe it was. The F stands for something in Japanese, I think. It's like Fuji something or another. Anyway, the reason that is the way that it is, where the larger number is actually a smaller aperture, is because it's a ratio. It's the size of that opening compared to, or rather, other way around, it's the length of the lens, the focal length of the lens, compared to the size of the opening. And so if you have a smaller opening, that's a bigger ratio. So that's why it works that way. All right. So somebody else mentioned that you could change the shutter speed on your camera. Basically the amount of time, that was you, wasn't it, Phil? The amount of time that the light is hitting the sensor there. And so yeah, if you do that, then you could get a brighter image or a darker image. What else does that affect? It does not affect depth of field. It doesn't strictly affect focus, although I think I know what you mean. It affects the sharpness of the image, but not in terms of focus. If I used a longer shutter speed and I just set a camera up and I shot that whiteboard there, it would be just as sharp as if I used a very short shutter speed. Why? Because it's not moving, yeah. If I open the shutter longer, then that means I'm giving time for things to move. And if they move while that shutter's open, you get a blur. So that's...
It also affects whether it's overexposed or underexposed.
Yes, yeah. So these are all ways of affecting the brightness there, the exposure.
So at constant exposure, if you're letting light in for a longer amount of time, you can have a smaller f-stop. So
Yep.
It affects the depth of field in that way, but it doesn't directly.
Indirectly, if you do it, if you maintain it, it can, if you maintain a constant. Yep, and I'm going to get to that. That's actually kind of what all this is leading up to. So yeah, changing the shutter speed will affect the sharpness of fast-moving objects. Motion blur is what that does. So like if you've seen, I actually couldn't find an example quickly for this. If you've seen like a waterfall, a waterfall where the water is all blurred and it's kind of feathery and everything like that. They used a very long exposure, a very slow shutter speed. But if, in contrast, it's frozen, like you see the individual droplets of water, they used a very fast shutter speed. Now, when it relates to video, you actually don't change this very much. And the reason, at least if you want that sort of professional look, the reason goes back to Hollywood again and what is the standard, what we've been trained to think is the professional look in movies. In a movie camera, the shutter is actually a rotating disc that's half open, half closed. And so it covers the film in actual film cameras, and then the film moves ahead to the next frame, and then it uncovers it, and then it covers it again, the film moves ahead to the next frame. So if you figure that out, the film is covered for half the time of how fast it's running. So we said the film is running at 24 frames a second, and so the normal shutter speed is exactly half that, or 1/48th of a second. And so if you want your video to have kind of a good professional look that has that same amount of motion blur that you see in movies, then usually what you want is for your shutter speed to be half what your frame rate is. So if you're shooting 24 frames a second, your shutter speed should be about 1/48th of a second, or 1/50th if your camera doesn't do 1/48th. If you're shooting 30 frames a second, then go for about 1/60th of a second. Anybody think of any examples of movies that did something different? May not have noticed this. Ooh, they might have.
What's that?
This is a relatively recent thing. Since, I guess, what, late 90s, early 2000s or so, that this became more commonplace. Probably the two most famous examples I can think of are the battle scenes in Gladiator and the storming the Normandy beach and Saving Private Ryan. In both of those, they used a very fast shutter speed. And if you watch them, you'll see that all the action is really crisp. It doesn't have that motion blur. And they did that deliberately to give it kind of a weird sort of jarring effect. You know, yes?
Well, if you're using just an automatic, handy cam, this is going to adjust itself automatically.
Yeah, usually it's going to adjust itself, but sometimes that's not what you want. Because, say it's really bright, and so your camera says, oh, I'm going to close down the shutter speed, and so you're shooting 30 frames a second, and your camera is only leaving that shutter open for 1/500th of a second or something like that. Now you've got this super, super crisp action instead of that normal blur, and so it looks kind of weird, and that actually contributes to that video-y look. Again, that you don't have the smooth motion.
Yeah.
So anyway, so usually you want it to be about half the frame rate, unless you're trying for sort of an unusual effect. All right, so other methods of changing the exposure here, or controlling the amount of light. Somebody already mentioned we could change the amount of light in the scene. Of course, that's not on the camera itself, but if you have control over that, that's a great way to change things. Or you can use what's called a neutral density filter. You can put something in front of your camera to actually change the amount of light coming in. So say in that example where it's really bright and your camera really wants to close that shutter speed down, then you might put that neutral density filter in there so that your camera doesn't do that crazy high shutter speed, so you get more of that filmic look. All right, so as Daryl mentioned, there are trade-offs everywhere. If you change one of these things, all of these affect your exposure, how bright the image is. So assuming that you have your brightness set properly, you have your exposure looking good, if you want to change one of them, you have to change something else to counter it. So maybe your shutter speed is too high, you want to lower that shutter speed, and so something else, you are now letting more light in because your shutter speed is lower. And so somewhere else you have to cut down the light. So maybe that means you have less light in your scene if you have control over that. But of course, if you're just outdoors and it's sunlight, you don't. So maybe you turn down the sensitivity of the camera, or maybe you close down that aperture or something like that. All of these things could reduce the light.
Who was the photo guy that came here for a boot camp?
Eli.
Oh, Eli?
Eli Vega had a really good analogy. It's that film will only take a certain amount of light to expose it.
Mm-hmm.
So that light can come in as a big piece, real short, or a long piece, real small.
Yep.
And that helps to say, yeah, it's going to have a big depth of field if it's a long piece of light. going through a small hole for a long amount of time, it's going to have more depth of field than if it's going through a big hole real fast. It's a short depth. So it's a really easy way to remember everything.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
A water faucet will fill a bucket with a small faucet running a long time.
Yep.
Or a big faucet running a real short amount of time.
Yep, totally. Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, yep, they call that reciprocity. So, whatever, not that you need to know that. But the important thing is that all these things are interrelated, and you change one and it changes the other. Now, as you were saying, Daryl, yeah, so changing shutter speed would, well, it doesn't directly affect your depth of field, but it very well might indirectly affect it, because in order to correct your exposure, then you're also going to need to change your aperture. So the trick with all of this is to control your light in such a way that you're getting the result that you want. So, what is the result that you want? Well, a lot of times the result that you want is to create depth in the image. Because normally our images are very flat. I mean, this is, how thick is this? This is like a millimeter thick or so, yeah. Of course, the image itself doesn't really have any thickness to it. And so, of course, we want to sort of simulate real life. And so a lot of what we're trying to do in making our images look better is we're trying to simulate depth. So, what is it that cues our brains that there's depth going on, that things are in 3 dimensions? Sorry?
I was just thinking the lens of the eye.
Okay, what do you
The
mean?
eye.
How much light? I suppose, in a way.
Views from 2 different perspectives.
Yeah, binocular vision, yeah. Oh, is that what you meant? Okay, yeah.
Also focus.
Yep, focus, yeah. Yeah, so focus is one, where your eye is focused, or the fact that some things are in focus and some things are not. So yeah, and then binocular vision. I'm assuming that most of you are not going to be shooting in 3D for your, so we won't be dealing with binocular vision here. Okay, so yeah, focus is a good one. What else? There are a whole lot of them, and actually everybody thinks of binocular vision first, but binocular vision really is only good for things that are relatively close.
Perspective, like the doors.
Yeah, perspective, exactly. How large something is, things that are smaller, vanishing lines and all that sort of thing. Yep. If let's see here. If I go like this, am I in front or behind the screen?
Yes.
Yes. This screen. I'm in front. How do you know? I'm blocking it because this blocks that. So yeah, when something is in front of something else, that's a good cue. What about when you're driving and you look out the window to the side? Somebody else is driving because you're being safe, and you look out the window to the side.
When something's moving at a different speed.
Yeah, you see.
Motion blur.
Yeah, yep. Yep, so yeah, lighting. So there are 2 more. So we've got parallax, the fact that things farther away seem to move slower than things closer. They kind of move in relationship to each other. And then light. Light can affect our, how we see depth, and so that sort of the shading. So I think we've covered all of them here. So we've got perspective, that is things larger and smaller. Focus, changes in focus. Parallax, that change as you move. And then shading. Now there's some others. There's binocular vision. There's your brain actually. Based on how your eyes are converging and where the lens is focusing, your brain uses that as a cue for how far away something is. But we don't get to use those in video because we're always looking at the screen and it's always that far away and we're always focused that far away. Same with the binocular vision. But all these others we actually get to use. And so when people tell you, oh gosh, 3D, finally, movies are 3D. Well, they've been 3D for a long time. They just didn't use binocular vision as one of the cues. So anyway, so this is a lot of what professionals do. They do things to use these cues to create depth in the image. So it doesn't look flat, it's got some depth to it. So here are some examples. First of all, for perspective. Does anybody see a familial resemblance here? This is my dad. So. Anyway, he was kind enough to help me out by doing all these samples here. So, yeah, I know, right? So here we have actually a really poor example of composing for depth. There's no depth in that whatsoever. You know, there's just a flat wall. This would be a really boring way to stage an interview. You know, it's just flat. There's nothing there. So
it almost looks like the picture could be floating.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have no cue there for where that is. It's very weird. So, oh yes.
Is part of that just because it's so white and there's so much white coming in?
That's part of it too. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. But yeah, and the fact that it's just flat, there's nothing at different distances. So here we have something that we have things at different distances here. And so we've got, you know, clearly he's in the foreground, and then we have things that we can tell are farther away because they're smaller, you know, and because they're, what's that?
And slightly out of focus.
And slightly out of, yeah, and so that's another one that we get to see here, and I think I bring back this same image to illustrate that. And we also, you know, he's blocking things, and so we know, like we said before, you know, it's behind him. So that's the first thing to look for. When you're setting these things up, look for depth in your scenes, you know? Don't back the person you're interviewing up against a wall or whatever. Set them out away from it. And if possible, get several layers of depth there, you know? So we've got my dad in the foreground, we've got this table saw in the middle ground, then we've got the wall back there and some things against the wall in the background. And then actually there's even an open door here. It's a little hard to tell what's going on here with the, we don't quite have enough brightness, but yeah, there's an open door that we can actually see through into the far distance there. So the next one, as you said, is depth of field. And so this, boy, I don't know if we're going to have the resolution on this projector to see this or not. This is a...
focus in the background.
Yeah, we definitely have some more focus in the background there. Actually, I think I have this is actually a video, I believe. And so if you watch, it's going to change twice here. I'm at an f8, which is not quite the extreme that photo I showed you before, the f32, but it's a somewhat closed down aperture, somewhat smaller aperture. So we have a greater depth of field, more is in focus. And then I'm going to switch to an f4 in here. And so we'll see that less is in focus, and it actually switches back and forth twice. On the second one, I kind of cropped in a little bit so you could see things closer. So here we go. I think, yep, there we go. So there's the f4. Did you see how things went out of focus?
Puts more attention on your dad.
Yep, mm-hmm. And here we are, same shots I just cropped in, so we can see the things back there. You can see a little more clearly now. They're not quite in sharp focus, and there you can really see the difference there. That's how things went out of focus. And you're right, it draws more attention to my dad. What's that?
He could smile.
Yeah, I know. He does. We'll get to see that. So it draws attention, which is a good thing, and it also helps with that, us perceiving depth here. We see that, things are at a different distance. Okay, so we talked about parallax also. So if we want to create parallax, well, we said we see that like when we're driving along in the car or whatever, and so we have to do the same thing. We have to drive along with the camera. We have to move the camera if we're going to create parallax. And so if the camera moves, then you see everything shift there. And so that again now cues you, there's depth going on here. We're moving in space. So that's another cool tool to create depth. And last of all, is lighting.
Boom for that or a steady?
That was a slider dolly.
Oh.
Getting fancy.
Yeah.
I just saw one of those at a concert. I was at a festival. and
Oh, yeah?
The guys on stage, filming the musicians.
Uh-huh.
It's the first time I've ever seen that.
Now, was it a big dolly on tracks
No,
or
it was like a rod that
just
was
a-
like.
oh, cool,
the
yeah.
camera was mounted on it, and then the camera just kind of.
Yeah, yeah.
on the
Uh-huh.
rod.
I have mine with me, and actually I have a cool gadget that I'm going to tell you about that, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, this is, that sort of thing right there, we're going to talk about it more later, but that movement there, that screams production value right there. Like when you see that sort of movement, it's like, ooh, wow, this is cool, you know? So, all right, okay, so lighting then. So what have we done with the lighting here? We want to light so that we see some shape to this here and create some contrast between the subject and the background. Actually, I really would have liked even better to have just some light in the far background there to create those layers of depth, but I didn't have a good way to motivate that in this case. And aside from which, I'm actually trying to illustrate simple lighting here, not a whole bunch of lights all over the place. So, and my dad was, obviously, not smiling, and I didn't want to make it take any longer. So, okay, so let's talk about lighting a little bit. So there's a very classic thing in photography and video called three-point lighting. Has anybody heard of this before? Three-point lighting, a lot of people. Is there anybody who's not heard of it before? Okay, all right, so it's worth going over. Cool. All right, so three-point lighting is just a pretty standard sort of starting point for lighting things. And you've got a light, 3 lights, and each of them has a different purpose. And so does anybody know the name of the, oh wait, we've got to get our people here. There we go, there's our orange person with the pointy nose we're seeing from the top here. And our camera. So, does anybody know the name of the main light? In the key light, exactly. It is key to the, the key light is the first light. So what does that do? What does the key light do? Okay. No.
No?
It is the main light, that's true. But it does not so much to light the front, yeah. The key light is to create shape. Yeah, exactly, yeah. You wanna create some shape. So, if you want to create shape, how does light create shape?
Angle?
Yeah, shadows. Well, both, light and shadows. And we need to see both, and then we perceive some shape going on there. And so if on our subject here, we want to see shape, we want to see light and shadows, where does the light need to be? Yeah, somewhere at an angle. Yep, can't be right directly straight on. Yeah, it has to be somewhere at an angle. So off to the side. Create shape. Yeah, we already said that. There we go. So yeah, it should usually be off to the side somewhere. Little pro tip here. Usually, you want your light, so we've got our subject looking this way and our camera here. Usually you want your key light on the opposite side of where the subject is facing from the camera, not on the same side. Any ideas why that might be?
Creates that,
Yeah, you get
you can see the shape of their nose.
exactly. Yep. Yeah, you get more of that shadow going on. If it's over here somewhere, then you see a whole bunch of bright, and you maybe see a little shadow over here. But if it's here, now you get kind of a nice split. You get the light over here, and you get the shadow over here. Okay.
I'm not understanding. The light's coming this way at the person?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's coming that
Yeah.
way. Kind of just getting part of their face then? not the
Exactly.
whole face,
Mhm.
and then you're
Yep.
gonna have your second light.
Yeah. So the second light. What's the second light called? The fill light. Yeah. So what's the fill light's job?
To fill in the rest.
Yeah, to fill in the rest. Right.
So it's not completely in shadow.
Yeah, exactly. So if we do this, then if we were in the vacuum of space anyway, we'd be completely in shadow. Now in real life, that doesn't really happen. And in fact, sometimes you
It's a
can,
completely black room.
yeah, yep.
Like Charlie Rose always has the black.
Right, yep. Yeah, so you'd end up with kind of some dark shadows over here. And so you want to bring those up usually, unless you're shooting, you know, a mystery or something like that. So, which probably most of us aren't for this sort of thing. We don't, we're trying to make things look happy for our products that we're selling, not mysterious. Okay, so we need a light to kind of bring up the shadows. So where do we put that? Me? Where's?
Close to where the camera is.
Here. So, here? That's what you're thinking, Greg?
Close to the camera.
You'd put it close to the camera?
I was thinking just a little bit
Or a little
off
high.
from the camera.
Like here? Here?
No, like, yeah, no, to the right.
Here?
Up
Okay.
A little closer.
Okay, like here? Or closer?
Yeah, around there.
All right. And this is a top-down view, by the way.
That's
Oh,
it.
top down,
And
so yeah,
up
it's
high.
higher.
And up
but it's
high,
coming
yeah.
from-
Okay, so maybe somewhat higher?
right,
Yeah,
right
okay.
where it is.
All right. So now you said close to the camera, and you're saying opposite the camera. There are differences of opinion on this. You will hear different things from different people. I think that the right place to put it is near the camera. In fact, ideally, a key light would be right, like on the camera itself, just this big soft light just sort of surrounding the camera. A fill light, excuse me, I'm sorry, yep. Why?
Because it's not the backlight.
Because, okay, because it's not some other light, yeah. All right. Yeah, well.
It fills everything uniformly from the perspective of your eye.
Exactly, yep. If we put it somewhere else, like say we put it over here.
It's a competing key light.
It's a competing key light. Yeah, now this light over here is creating shadows here. And this light is creating shadows here. And so we get this weird thing, they actually call it trap shadows. You get like a nose shadow going both directions. It's just weird. So anyway, the closer we get it to the camera, the closer it is to that perspective, which means that the shadow from it is cast in places the camera doesn't see.
And a little high is what your eye is used to seeing.
Yeah, usually up a little bit, yeah, a little high, yeah. So now in reality, we can't really get it just as this big diffuse bubble right around the camera. And so, yeah, we usually put it somewhere near, usually a little high. Light from below, this is one of my film school teachers said this, and we couldn't figure it out. Where does light come from below? In hell, yes. So that's why we don't do that normally. Yeah, you don't want to put your lights below. That makes people look creepy. It's like the flashlight, you know, when you're telling campfire stories or whatever, you look creepy when you put the light down here. So you don't put the light down here, you put your lights above. What?
Or eating in 10 forward.
Oh, do they have? Oh, yeah, right. Let's see. Okay, so our key light, like I said, you will hear some people who say, oh, that should go opposite the, our fill light, excuse me. Our fill light, well, people will tell you that should go opposite the key. But for the reasons that I have stated, I think it actually belongs near the camera. If anything, probably a little bit on the same side, but you can go either side of it. A little bit on the same side is where the key is, and a little bit above, like you were saying. Your key light should also be a little bit above. Okay, so our third light, you already mentioned it, is the backlight. What's the backlight for?
Separate the subject from the background.
That's it exactly, yep.
And so you don't get shadows that the subject's making. It kind of fills in those shadows a little bit.
Where does it go? Should be pretty easy with the name. Yeah, back behind. Yeah, back behind the subject, and usually on the opposite side of the key, because of course the key light is more or less lighting up that side. So we have some examples here. That same. My dad still looking grumpy. So here is with a key light. Now this is actually a fairly extreme key light. I have it quite a ways over to the side. In some cases you might not put it quite that far over. So anyway, and then the fill light is in front here. This also, perhaps I could have had the fill light a little closer to the camera here, maybe for a strict 3-point lighting scenario. Well, yeah. In what is it they say? In theory and practice are the same, and in practice they're not. Something like that. So all this is theory. All these are guidelines. In reality, you get into the situation and you kind of start out this way, and then you say, well, that's doing something funny. I'm going to move this over here a little bit or whatever. And so I've shifted things around and so forth. But it's still basically the way I showed you there. So with the key and the fill, now we get this going on. So you can see we've brought up those shadows that before it was really dark on the right side of his face. And we've kind of brought that up somewhat. But we still definitely have more light on the left side of his face. So we've got some real shape going on there. But the top of his head there, the back of his head, is really kind of blending into the background. There's no separation there. So that's why we have our backlight. So just the backlight, we've got something like that going on there. With the key in the backlight, see now we can see, okay, the key lights up the left side, the backlight, we're getting that little edge there, but we definitely have this sort of dark shadow in the middle there, which would be great if we're trying to make him look mysterious, but we're probably not. And so that's why we add our fill to get the whole shebang there.
So the position of the backlight is on the opposite side where?
Usually up kind of high, so in this case...
Like at the level where the camera is, or closer to the subject, or further away, but up high?
Usually high-ish. And then as far as distance, that's a really good question. So
Well, I mean, like if
out of the frame is a good...
what I mean is if he's the subject, is it parallel to where he's sitting, or is it in back?
Usually somewhat behind.
Okay, so it
If
is
it were right parallel, then you would tend to get... Yeah, in fact, that key light that I have was pretty close to if you did a line from the camera to my dad and then perpendicular over to that key light, that's pretty much where it was sort of a perpendicular line right there. And so we got really just kind of half lit up. And so if you did the same thing with the backlight, you'd end up with the same thing over there.
Right, so if the key light's here, the backlight's going to be on the opposite side, but not at the same distance, but over here.
Yeah, off behind it. Yeah, let me see if I can go back. Ah! Don't leave the app. There we go. Go back here. I'm going to advance through all this here. So then another good thing that you brought up, couple of tips with these. So yeah, here you go. So my backlight is actually pretty well behind. Off to this side a little bit, but pretty well behind, so you're really just getting kind of an edge there. You don't want that lighting up too much, because then you just end up evening everything out and you don't have that shape anymore. Yeah, Tom?
Do you ever point the backlight press background?
Yes, and so one thing that you can do sometimes, rather than lighting the back of your subject, you can turn it around and light your background and create the separation that way. And so then you're trying to accomplish sort of a light on dark, dark on light type of thing. So the light side of the subject's face is against dark in the background. The dark side of the subject's face is against light in the background. And there is, I believe it's The Practice, which I don't think is on the air anymore, but that, I believe that's the TV show, just does that like crazy all over the place. If you watch that, that is what they do. Yeah, like really dramatic light on dark, dark on light all the time. Now another thing, getting to your point, Tom, is I have shown these lights here pointed at the subject. If you're imagining, what I'm trying to indicate are these are the rays of light spreading out here with my crude graphics. But often, especially these days, sort of the modern look is to not have lights pointed directly at the subject. It's actually to use a lot of bounce light. That can really give you some more pleasing light to bounce the light off the wall or the ceiling or whatever. Of course, you want to be careful what color the thing is that you're bouncing it off. If you bounce it off those cabinets, then your light is going to be tannish coming off those. Yeah.
Or they make these things with wire hoops that have a reflective gray, silvery surface that will bounce the sunlight.
I have one of those. I should have put that on my list of cool, cheap gear. Yeah, that's a good one to write down for that.
Especially for her that's not.
Yep, yeah, for the available light thing, exactly, yep, yep,
Manipulate it around with
yeah.
And you can fold it up and put it in your
Yep.
bag.
A really good brand name one will cost you like $100, but a cheap Chinese knockoff will cost you, I don't know, 15. So, anyway, yeah, so bouncing the light instead of actually doing these directly, and that's exactly what I did for this shot here. I actually,
Pizza box or something.
yeah, I just took the lights and I turned them around and I faced them into the walls. And so then you get a much nicer, softer light that kind of wraps around instead of having these harsh edges. One other thing that is helpful, you don't want your lights right up on your subject. I mean, obviously you don't want them where the camera can see them, but you also don't want them just outside there if you're on a really close shot, because what happens to light the farther away you get from it?
Just get parallel.
It gets parallel and less intense. Yeah, it gets dimmer. And so if the light is really close, right here, you know, then the difference ratio-wise between my nose and my ear is quite a bit. My ear is like, I don't know, half again as far away. So if the light's right here, I lost actually a fair amount of light. And so you get hot spots that way if you put your lights really close. If you can back your lights up somewhat, then you don't get those hot spots because the difference between the light hitting here and the light hitting here is not so great.
Put a lady's nylon over the stock.
And that can help too, yeah, to diffuse it somewhat, because then you get the light coming from different angles. So those two things will help soften your light and prevent hot spots. Diffuse it somehow. Bouncing the light off a wall does the same thing, or putting a stocking or whatever over it to diffuse it. And backing the light up. Doesn't actually diffuse things, doesn't soften it, but at least it keeps you from getting those hot spots. I have really 2 slides on audio. Do you want to keep talking about that and then I'm done with our first segment here? Okay, so audio. There's a saying in the video field, and that is that video is 2/3 audio. The audio really is kind of, in a sense, the most important thing. Now, unfortunately, to video people, audio is like this alchemy. We're like, what? I don't get it. And to audio people, video is like a mystery. And so, yeah, a lot of times, like if you want really, really good audio, you just have to find somebody who really, really knows audio. But that's you can still get pretty good audio without going that far. It's very important though, because bad audio is a deal breaker. If your audio is obnoxious to listen to, people are going to turn your video off. If your video is shaky or whatever, the color isn't great or whatever, they'll stay with you. But if your audio is grating, or if people can't understand, if people can't hear what's being said or whatever, people are just going to shut it off. So, just like light, audio fades with distance. So where should your microphone be?
Close to your speaker.
Close to your speaker, yeah, or whatever it is that you're trying to catch. Yep, yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
If there's 2
Yep.
speakers halfway in between, if there's only one mic.
Sure, yeah, if you only have one mic, yeah, yep, yeah. Because you've got all sorts of sound coming from everywhere else. You've got your air conditioning, your whatever, all that sort of stuff. Of course, if you can, turn that stuff off. Put your car keys by the refrigerator that you unplugged so that you don't forget to plug it back in. Yeah, so if you can, turn that stuff off, but you've got all this other noise, including echoes from your speaker. And so if your microphone is very close, then it picks up mostly them and very little of this other stuff, because those other sound sources are much farther away. So when you're putting a mic on a person, that means that it should be roughly mid-sternum or so, just like you were saying about, yep.
Do this.
Yeah,
Wherever that finger,
yep,
that L
yep.
or that finger is. That's where the lapel goes or whatever you're using. If you're holding.
That's cool. I haven't heard that trick. That's a neat one. Huh. All right, yeah. Anyway, if you're putting it on clothing, you want to anchor it to something that's not going to move. So a button or something like that is a good place, or near a tie pin or whatever it might be. I don't know, whatever is not going to move around, because when you have movement there in the clothing, I'm tapping, Steve is going nuts because I'm tapping the microphone to show you here. So yeah, if you look at this strange looking guy up here, I have an arrow showing where the, you know, roughly where it might be a good position. Maybe you could go with that higher one too, but in between is a little bit more problematic because that's going to shift around. It'll rub against the microphone, and anything like that gets picked up. And it gets obnoxious. Finally, for audio, if your audio is too loud, it's unrecoverable. If it's too quiet, I mean, you don't want it really quiet, because the more you boost it, just like the video that we talked about earlier, the quality reduces if you have to boost it a whole lot. But better too quiet than too loud. If it's too loud, it distorts and there's nothing you can do about it. If it's too quiet, at least you can boost it up somewhat. So anyway, I have just a quick example of sounds from different microphones. The first one is on the camera. The second one is actually a shotgun microphone that I had on a stand, somewhat closer. And then the third one, actually, I just used an iPhone headset because that's one of my tips for how to record audio. And so especially listen for the difference in the echo that you can hear between these.
I've kind of done woodworking as a hobby for much of my adult life. I've kind of done woodworking as a hobby for much of my adult life. I've kind of done woodworking as a hobby for much of my adult life.
Hear how much cleaner that last one there was?
Even though it was quiet.
Yeah, it was a little quiet. I did turn it down, but it was truly a little quieter, but yeah. Yep, it wasn't overmodulating, and you didn't have all that echo in there. You can always add echo with an effect or something like that later, but it's almost impossible to take it out. All right, so kind of been answering questions along the way, but does anybody have any questions about what we just talked about? All right, cool. So up next, after our break, is we're going to talk about storytelling.